Hi everyone. So firstly, a big thank you to Lana and to Raz, Tel Aviv for putting this together, and to all of the other sites that are either streaming with us or watching later. I can't see you, but welcome, and it's a pleasure to have you. So these lights are a little bit bright. So firstly, before we begin, I'd like to get an idea of who's in the audience. So a couple of questions. Who here has never done a Bitcoin transaction? And who here knows what Ethereum is? And who understands what the DAO hack was? Anyone SegWit, Bitcoin Unlimited, understand the difference? Okay, brilliant. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to try and introduce a few concepts to make sure that everyone's in a similar place. And then we're going to examine an interesting question from the perspective of morality. So, firstly, who am I? I am a blogger. We've been running a blog for quite a few years now. My background is in online gambling, and today I'm an advocate for blockchain and for Bitcoin, and I speak at different events around the world. We started the blog in 2013. It was a hobby blog that I started, and since then it's actually grown to be one of the larger news sites, and we've launched now recently a podcast, which you can follow us and sign up. And we do interviews with different people in the space, as well as our own analysis on things that are happening in the news. We're also relaunching the site next month, so it'll be clearer, split into the different sections related to blockchain or Ethereum or individual technical things, as opposed to everything else. So tonight we're going to be watching a very interesting documentary. It's one of the latest in a series that have come out the last few years, mostly introducing Bitcoin to an audience and focusing on how it can potentially change the banking sector. It's very high quality. There's a lot of really interesting interviews in it, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. So the first thing to talk about in terms of blockchain is what is a smart contract and the risk of human moderation in it. So smart contracts were essentially made popular by the Ethereum platform, and they allow for the automation of a much more complex set of rules. Many of the use cases for what Bitcoin technology could do in terms of managing land registries or controlling electricity grids is based on the implementation of a smart contract. So what happened is last year there was a hack on the Ethereum network, and a user found an exploit and stole $50 million worth of Ethereum and transferred it to his own account. The smart contract flagged the transaction, froze it, created a new account, moved the money out, and then sent a signal to Vitalik Buterin, who is the creator of Ethereum, to say that this transaction looks dodgy. What should I do about this money? And then what happened was he contacted everyone on the network to say, what should we do? Do we let it go through because there was a code exploit, or do we stop it? And that actually resulted in a split in the community. And they split it into two coins, into Ethereum and to Ethereum Classic, which was a forced hard fork. And as a result, there's been this debate that started, how should we handle these things? And a lot of the future of what's going to happen with smart contracts as implementation is being based on what we've seen with Ethereum. So there's primarily two arguments. So the arguments against it is that the smart contract was set up and was meant to be autonomous. That if you start messing with contracts or you affect blockchains, then you are changing the nature of its immutability. And ultimately that the code is king and we shouldn't get involved because human beings make mistakes. The argument in favor of it, again, is that human beings make mistakes. So there's a big difference between what someone intended when they set up the contract versus what they actually coded, because they maybe aren't the best developer in the world. Can we ever really test something enough? Because it's only unhackable until it's hacked. I mean, very simply, I think that this sums up everything. I don't think we need to say anything else, right? So this is a great word that we actually heard at Mark's place down the road. And it means the people who are against the people who are against the establishment. And I thought this was very apt for what happened in Ethereum and the community. So the question is, do we have a responsibility? If what we are doing is going to affect the future, then should we consider our responsibility? Most of what's happening with Bitcoin and blockchain is in a very small segment. Most of the world really has no idea what's going on. If not, I'm going to move a bit. Tell me if I come off the stream, but these lights are very, very bright. So not only are we a tiny minority of people, but within a small community, the people who understand technically enough to have arguments about the implementation are a small niche within a small subset of a community. So we have incredible bearing over what's going to happen in the future. But do we ever consider what we should do? If most of the world doesn't know that this technology exists and going to change their life, don't we have some kind of responsibility to decide for them? And before we talk about what that obligation may be, we should look at the different types of blockchains that are currently in use today. So primarily speaking, we have three types of blockchains. Bitcoin, which is the original and the classic blockchain, which is essentially, it's completely transparent, it's immutable, everyone has equal voting rights on it, and decisions are arrived at consensus. Then we have private blockchains, which are set up traditionally by banks or by organizations that want to use the technology, but they want to keep it in-house. These may be public, they may not be, they may be immutable, they may not be, but the decisions are at the discretion of the people who set up the blockchains. And then what we've seen now is the idea of partially decentralized blockchains. So these bear characteristics from both types of blockchains. Traditionally, they will often be public ledger. There will be a consensus system, but the stakeholders will usually have more voting rights, or they will have the ability to override a public consensus. And the idea of having a split system is that it allows for much, much more complexity to be built into the network. And then the idea of CSR, corporate social responsibility, is something that companies try and do as they get bigger. The idea of paying back into their communities. And this is something that I've seen discussed a lot of times, is there really a place for CSR in cryptocurrency? And I would argue that other than it being incredibly effective, this is a lot of the ideology on which Bitcoin was based when it was originally created. So now we get to the current situation. Speaking more from a technical perspective, we have a problem in Bitcoin network today. And that is that the network has slowed down in terms of confirmations, that transaction fees have increased, and this is all related to the blocks which are currently set at a 1 meg limit, basically having reached capacity. When Bitcoin was first created, the blocks would increase in size as was needed. But then a while ago, the limit was hard-coded, and now there's an argument about how to fix it. So everyone agrees that it should be fixed, but there's a split as to which solution to use. And primarily there are two solutions that are being suggested. The one is called Bitcoin Unlimited, which is variable block size that can be set individually by miners, and it's dynamic in real time. And then there's SegWit, which isn't actually a change to the block size, but it's a lot of bug fixes, and it changes the way the transactions are processed within the blocks, which allows for an increase in throughput, so an effective block increase. But more importantly, SegWit deals with the malleability issue in the blockchain, which means that the Lightning Network can be implemented on top of it. Now, the Lightning Network theoretically solves all of the problems that we're talking about, and it appeals primarily to businesses. It has a lot of commercial interest because it allows for transactions to be done and confirmed instantly. So, whereas today you have to wait for a certain number of confirmations, a business doesn't want to accept money from someone until it's been written in the blockchain and confirmed to actually have happened. Lightning Network allows for that to be instantaneous between trusted partners. Lightning channels are set up off-chain. They're essentially confirmed and committed back to the blockchain with trust verification from both parties. So you could send money to anyone you know. It would be 100% instant, and it would not require any confirmation. And this would obviously massively reduce the load on the current blocks and transactions, which would mean everything would speed up as well. So I've tried to very, very quickly run through all of that. I see that we have a mix in terms of knowledge in the audience, and presumably some of the people watching also have a different level of knowledge. So perhaps before we get into some of the issues of morality. If there's anything anyone wants to ask quickly, or something that people feel is missing in terms of understanding to move forward. No? Great. So this was a very interesting question, and when we were talking about showing the movie, we were thinking about a topic that would make a lot of sense. So last year we were at a blockchain conference, and the question came up of this responsibility. And what I'm hoping to do with this talk is not in a couple of minutes that remain to address every single possible aspect of morality, or to in fact answer them. But as people that are working in the Bitcoin or the blockchain or the crypto community, and we have a wide range of different opinions, from crypto anarchy and libertarianism all through to just pure economic incentive, I urge everyone to take a step back and consider, is there a moral imperative? If I'm working on a disruptive technology that has the potential to be transformative, should I care about other people? So I think that there's primarily 7 aspects to the morality here. The first is CSR, which we spoke about, and that is, as a business, should you be giving back to local economy or the community in which you operate? And I would say yes, plus it's exceptionally good marketing. The next is real world problems. We have a lot of problems that have existed for a long time. We have a new technology that we don't know yet what it can do. I suggest that we should relook at many of the problems we thought were not solvable, because it's very possible that this technology provides us with new tools to solve problems that existed. And then the technology itself, I would say that we actually have a responsibility to develop the technology. There's never been a case before with a disruptive technology where we are arguing about the way it needs to work before we figured out what it can do. And this is because of how powerful the implications are. If you look at the smart contracts and the DAO hack, you can't go and implement massive change in terms of land registries or move around people's medical records until you understand the risks. You can't understand the risks until you understand what technology can do. So we have to figure out what we're going to build in the next 10, 20 years before we can decide about how it's going to be built. And that's never happened before. So I think that as people who are technical in nature, or especially here in Israel where we have such an innovative spirit, we should be actively pursuing the technology to find out how far the rabbit hole goes. And then next is economic incentive. As people who are part of the early adopters or startup nations or people developing applications, I think we have a responsibility to increase the economic incentive. Enterprise and government typically only get involved or use technology for the public good when there's a large enough economic incentive to do it or a large enough cost to avoid doing it. So as companies that have the ability to affect the economy, I think we need to introduce an economic incentive by doing so and encourage government and enterprise to get to the party soon. From a libertarian perspective, this is where a lot of the original people involved in Bitcoin came from. If you look back to the 90s, to the cypherpunks movement, where a lot of the original ideas behind Bitcoin came from, these are people who believe that Bitcoin is an ideology more than it's a technology. And in that case, it can be used to decentralize power, to bring some of the power back to the people. So arguably that's a moral obligation as well. And then the unbanked. This is something that we hear about a lot. We have roughly half of the world without access to bank accounts today. This is an incredibly ridiculous statistic for the 21st century. And the people who stand to benefit the most from this technology have the highest technical barrier to entry. So I think we have a responsibility to reduce that barrier, but to also bring the technology to the people who can benefit the most from it. And ultimately, the point I want to focus on the most is consensus. And as much as I think all 6 of those points are interesting, and there's many others that I haven't addressed, I would argue the only one that is actually imminent, the one that by far demands and outweighs all of the others, is the obligation for consensus. A lack of consensus on the scalability of the network can be the Bitcoin killer. And whether we like it or not, Bitcoin is the flagship for the technology. If people start using the network and it costs $5 or $10 to set a transaction, or you have to wait 5 hours for a confirmation, or it's not clear what's going on, it's not easy to use, then adoption rates will suffer. The technology will not come to fruition. So I would argue that everyone who is part of the community, or in some way or form involved in a technical discussion, should take a very serious step back and ask themselves if the argument they're putting forward for one of the sides of the solution, or the hash power they're maintaining to prevent there being consensus, or the lack of signaling on their mining nodes, they should wake up and understand that the worst solution will still be infinitely better than no solution for much longer. And that, I would argue, is ultimately the moral imperative of Bitcoin as we stand today. That's me. So I think we don't have long, but if I may just, if there are any questions quickly, and then afterwards we can meet. Yeah.
Are you arguing that we should support Bitcoin rather than altcoins?
Have them repeat.
Interesting question. The question was, am I arguing that we should support Bitcoin instead of altcoins? So it's a very interesting question. I don't think there's a simple answer. I think it's ultimately personal. I think that the technology for me is more interesting than Bitcoin itself. But I think that it depends on the audience. You know, if you're looking to trade or arbitrage on it, that's a different question I'm not addressing. But for the most part, yes. For the most part, yes. But I would distinguish between altcoins and ICOs. I think that altcoins that exist today, if you're looking at, you know, the original like Litecoin, or even some of the zero knowledge ones, Dash, Monero, they do something different, that's fine. But ICOs are radically different. Those are implementations of blockchain that bring a new application technology. But in terms of the 1,000 other coins that exist versus Bitcoin, yeah, put the power of Bitcoin unless it's something materially different like zero knowledge. I can see everyone wants to ask, don't be shy. One more question? No? Okay, so we're going to start the movie now, I think. Enjoy it. It's really, really good. And Ilana? Yeah.